English on page number 11. I take refuge.
I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Brahma. I take refuge in Sangha. From now on, I take refuge in Buddha. All sentient beings, all sentient beings, all sentient beings
Mountain with Rome, strong and boundless, Mount Meru, encircled by 4 continents, surmounted by the sun and the moon. I visualize this benefic offering. May all living beings enjoy the pure land.
Oh ja, ne, Chakra dash this.
Good morning to you all.
Ne, dang azu. Ta jam ro ngon ro sambaji. Ne, de nangba sangji wi go la ya chi. Ne, simple ne. Simple tamchi ge ton dong ngomber zo sangji gi sambe samlo de thaba chenbu go na ya zo re. Ta ne 디지고 참여자 검진 참여자 뜻다 심지 탐주 동용지 동용구지고 될라니 등을 있잖아 삼바동 대바동 삼바동 때 전에 이자와 차들라 가와 검니 디강나 딱비성게 나와 검니 근데 다 전지스 공방인지 고면시
Let's repeat what we have practiced in previous Sunday. That means, first of all, please generate the mind of seeking for refuge from Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, meaning that develop the mind of refuge, and then that ensure, and that very practice of meditation ensure you to be into the path of Buddhist teaching, or becomes, or based on that mind of refuge, and then develop the altruistic intention or the bodhicitta. In mind that that mind be turned for the sake of all sentient beings, and you want to attend the Buddhahood, and that the development of this generation of bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening, will ensure you, or transforming you to the path of Mahayana, the great vehicle teaching. And then from there, and we're going to recite, we recited the 4 immeasurable thoughts. So we wish that all sentient beings, again, based on the mind of awakening, or take the mind of awakening as the base, then we determined to want to help the all sentient beings and to endure with the happy and the causes of happiness, and wish that we want determined to bring the joys and happiness to the sentient being. And then we also then we move on and determined to free all sentient beings away, or separate all sentient beings from their current awful samsaric painful suffering and painful living conditions. So that's the wish people and every being, and that can be bring the happy, the joy into them. That's the practice of a generation of kindness. And then wish free or separate take the sentient being out away from the suffering, cause suffering. That's the practice of compassion. And then you rejoice, but the all sentient being. It doesn't matter whatever how insignificant and the virtuous action or deeds they committed or they are engaging, just simply, deeply, genuinely rejoice and show your great appreciation, whereby they develop the great mind of the joyful mind, the mind of delightness. And then finally, that they develop the mind of equanimity and truly see that all sentient beings are equal. There's no reason to be biased or to show a great affection to a particular individual or individual group, and to ignore and neglect the others.
진짜 다 토마 검을 찾아 아니 검 당고 저서 랑이라 삼로던 랑이 대화도 받아 등은도 밤도 테마 어떻게 되질라지 거 없어 자서 대자서 좀 이거 기타단들이 메데 틀리셔도요 어떤다 심지어 랑이라 것은 랑이 대화도 받아 등은도 식바인 바삼로 당 네네 정말 너바 정말 자님 그 심지어 탐질라 식바인 바삼 당 터와이나 아니 동용 참여서 초중으로 대고미어서도 삼지 대화 등은다 나서비도 랑도 받는지 전도 받 대화동다 나서비 삼로 랑도 받는 전도 받으니까 용서도 대화동 등은다 저비 대화동 담비 차텔라다 가와곰니 온다 가와곰으로 삼지 대화동다 삼녀서 삼지 탐질라 등을 맵이 네게 송나때 노지 탐지 딱비상 정도로 당서 정도 됐다 딱비상 다 잔리즈게 생고 대화 전지 상들 다 사지 비지시면 런진도 야마 성지상도 뭐도 뭐야 아주 딜링에서도 야 초밥이 임진 가르치 돈 부기잖아 로케 남도 상라 줘버선 로버 넘버 딱비상 라 끼워 쇼세 뭐 잡으러 된다 딱상인 삼진이 되는 아주 잔리즈 공고
Yes, so he developed the mind of equanimity and truly that to feel that the every being and as far as the innate and desire is concerned, that is just like you yourself naturally wish to be happy and naturally wanted to get rid of the suffering. So in this regard, in that state of mind, of equanimity, you really see, and there's no any slightest difference between you and the individual or individual group. So, and then take that as a base of foundations of your meditation, and then you can truly rejoice the beings of whoever and is happy or enjoyed with happiness. So you can sincerely and genuinely become very delighted and happy, because now you see whatever you desire to help them achieve, they are actually, and that goal has been achieved. So that greater mind of joyfulness or the delightfulness is and then what transform you and then see the now that is enjoying is enjoying the happiness and enjoy with the causes of happiness, and not only the living, the sentient being, living and sentient beings, but the physical environment and also the world in which they live also is something to become very pleasant and joyful and ideal domain or ideal place. So this way, and you can see that everything is now being transformed, and is so we have the world in which everybody is enjoying their life, and the environment, the world in which they live also is very pleasant and desirable. So, and then this is generally speaking can be is the form of the pure vision or pure light and or kind of a pure Buddha field. And then from there, and then you meditate the Buddha of compassion, Analytical Chapter. And then we generated the mind of that's the Avalokiteshvara in your meditation, and then like we recite it every time, and then we said that this like we said this ground and mounted with the perfumes and strewn with the flowers, Mountain Meru, and encircled by the 4 continents and surrounded by the sun and the moon. I visualize, so in this case, you visualize this Buddha field and offer it. So then which may all sentient beings enjoy the pure land.
다 잔디스 고모도 잔디스 말아도 등을 있잖아. 선배 삼로 따가랑 파. 디 샘따가랑 그 고치던 서리크 자대가랑 배 잔디스 그 결성선나 그거로서라. 잔디스 그 아니 잔디스 셔지와. 근데 땅이 잡으려면 들으지가 아니 곰 들으지 삼로 땅네. 아니 다 디트가나 오만에 받는 얘기 때 거라잖니. 다 들으지 얘기 때 오만에 받는 돈도 망설하고 그러다 옴 세대 링을 있음지 많이 받는 세대 샴다 장지지 답신이 오지 홈 세대 아주도 야와링이 오파 이ring이 와봐 다또 결성삼들 던데 삼들랑 아주 많이 잘 심잔도에 세대 바로 샘마야 사막에 때 삼로 당고지 잠바 마중은 만니기 이긴저리 오만에 받는 건 다가랑 샘도 맞은 안 되겠는데.
So, and develop that or generate and or meditatively to invoke the Buddha of compassion in your meditation, and then so then further that place your mind or focus your mind on the great mind of compassion. And so that compassion is that the strong, determined mind, the aim to separate all sentient beings free from the suffering and causes of suffering. And that is aspect of the point. What you need to pay attention is that while you are focused, right, focus on the greater mind of compassion, and so to make sure that you doing that, right, and basically, and all this can be happening is because of you understood and the illumination and the insightful the aspect of your own consciousness, right? So your consciousness, the aspect of your consciousness is and then it is penetrative and insightful and deeply comprehensive, deeply apprehensive. So keep that in your mind. Then whether the Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha, and that you have meditated upon, and you've seen you seen in your meditation is basically the transformed version. In other words, it's a transformed from that pure aspect of your mind, and that is illuminating and perfectly insightful wisdom. And then so further to meditate on the focus on the at this point. It is assumed that you see the general whole of the presence of Avalokiteshvara in your meditation, and now shift your focus on the heart chakra of Avalokiteshvara. And Avalokiteshvara at this point is a four-armed, one face, so zoom in and place your attention on the heart chakra of Avalokiteshvara, and you see there's the heart mantra of Avalokiteshvara, the Om Mani Padme Hum, is there. And then, as we all have learned this in the previous classes, we know that when you recite Om Mani Padme Hum, the Om represents body, speech, of mind, and money is represented great compassion. Padme is represented the greater wisdom or the pure view, and then in the home is the represented in the philosophical term is represented the interdependent origination, meaning that the union or the combination of the skillful means that is compassion and the wisdom that understands the actuality. So, and Avalokiteshvara at this point also can be considered is the pure or transformed the aspect of and the 5 Dhyanka Buddhas. So try to cap all this in your mind, then we're going to recite an Om Mani Padme Hum for 300 times. And even if you can't really do all those detailed complete all those detailed tasks in your meditation, and at the very least, you can do one thing, and that is focus on the six syllables Om Mani Padme Hum. And while you are reciting the mantra, invoking the Avalokiteshvara, just to clearly and try to see that you hear and you clearly know that each sound, the syllables, you are reciting clearly and precisely, and without distracted, without your mind being, without lost your focus.
Mantra is on page number 70, the citation book. On page number 70. The first verse.
Toje chanje romazi, share zema shansano, Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Newton, changes on the Roa Chichang Mother, the Sama, Gober, Shows, Newton, Rogan, and Amano, Tato, Show, Madame, Sama, the June, and Rosenball, so Jason, Tiger, Oh, yeah. 다 가정대마 가정대 때스 가정 동보로 랑르기 세지고 어떤데 마도인다 랑길 리근다 로혼 다와 딱 비실링하니 지파랑드 지퍼 nganzin hanki ki muil phongbo yimba sawr ka sinjangs jewer teni tagpi dag mugpar sungwa tela ngao nyambi lochimi ki gi chang phongbo la ngao nyambi lo chi maki ngao nyambi lo ten makiwar rangi nyungwa la TV se shangsi gangzak kewa pamil papa soki kurwa la soba tarwa toba bo so dagji pongbo la teni taba yin la pongbo sogin soba ji yin tang jiwa gangzak mayin te huina shangta rangi yanlak pongbo so la teni taba yin ki te yanlak Riri tang chopa kangin shangta mayin ba jin oz doli chitir yanlak sonamla teni shangta jopa jin tebjin pongbo nam teni ganzo semjin shi jotos shi tang gangzaki njoksil da tawon niu te kona ni nyert tokbe tab zangbo shig de zigni namkin ki war ki chil kin layang rigpar rigin dawo se oto chichor tes ta nangarora ni chishina machine
So please go to your translation, page 122. I'm going to read it from the second paragraph. It is our own system. Our own system comes from the words of the master Chakra, who in his supplement thoroughly rejects the promise that the focal object of the innate concept of I is the aggregate. In his commentary to the supplement, by saying that the imputed self is the focal object, it implies that the thought of an I must arise naturally in relation to it. And with regard to such things as the aggregates, the thought of mind naturally arises. The thought of I. Since we reject the aggregates as being the self, only the thoughts of mind can arise in relation to them. The thoughts of I cannot do so because it arises as an imputation independent on the aggregates. This will become clear when we examine our own experience. Every person, whether a man or woman, an exalted or ordinary individual, within cyclic existence or liberated from it, is designated independence upon the aggregates which form the basis of designation. In this regard, neither the continuity of the assembly of aggregates, nor the assembly, nor the parts of the assembly, nor the continuity itself, nor even the one to whom that it belongs, the person. Take the example of a chariot. It is designated in dependence upon its various parts, such as the vehicle, such as the wheels, none of its individual parts, none. The collection of the parts is the chariot. Likewise, it is said in the sutra, just as we speak of a chariot dependent on the collection of parts, so we speak of the sentient being conventionally in dependence on its aggregates. Such a technique for determining the selflessness of the person is one of the best methods for cognizing the reality of things quickly. The same reason should be applied to all phenomena from a form up to the omniscient mind, in order to determine in such a way that there is no inherently existent person. We establish that there is no inherently existent I, and then that there is no inherently existent mind.
Oh yeah. 당 아주 때때랑 다 가정 만에 망보 시에들 다 있는 게 이거 시요 말다. 아주 처음에들 자금 제지라. 강조 산직 더 산지서야 때 간다지리 될 잡아지네. 아주 처음 삼당이지.
Okay. So, like we have, like we did before, we have this topic, the very difficult topic that we have actually discussed many times in previous occasions, and I myself also feels not that well informed in this particular subject. So I would suggest you all and join me to do the following analysis. In other words, I want to invite you all and meditate, engage in the form of meditation, what we call the analytical meditation. And let's invest. Let's do the critical examination and about what the contents of this topic.
다 jetongane ngarangzulane nga seate nganzin sel nganzil nyingura nganzil tela nganzil hanki tang kentak zinyur kentak nganzil hanki seate ngadu jiwa takwane mi chamagi gila nga seji yo tagarang te ripa chepa ching dipsida ching uyo mar nga kentak seate o nga seate kandazre da simji chin susu go logo zo den de zin sare de seji jangyo tela susu kentak se go tala ngadu chepa chesate nga hanki seate le chepa chensi.
So essentially, we know that we talk about I as the object of negation, or self, and that is again is the object of the negation. We have to know there are two forms of self, right? And the one is the self, which is imputed. This is the production of imputation or the conceptual mind. Another form of I or self is what we refer to as the innate self. So that innate self is something you do not need to really. It's not it is not the production of any philosophical establishment, or it is also it didn't come to seen as a result of any form of studies, learnings, but rather it's just you born with it, you come with your own birth. So that's the innate self. And the imputed self, or the self that is the production of conceptual mind, on the other hand, is different. Why? Because the I that's been considered or been believed in, or something that you finally sort of as a result of your systematical philosophical inquiry or the studies and learning. So if your sense of I being developed, produced, or established through such a investigation, studies, and learning, then that is self. What do we say is the mind-made conceptual production, and therefore it is not natural.
어떤 데 갈수구나 nga세데 요르와스 야 요나 nga세데 작고라 간다즈 조고고라스 야나 근데 람송 nga과이 저저나 람송 가서 봉보라고 nga세데 람송 로고 청구라 어때서 봉보 등만이 찍바래 왜는데 말와스 nga phongbo se gam da nge phongbo se gam da sa pechna chiwoda nge phongbo jin jing gro ma to nga phongbo se gam da nga phongbo se gam ta nga phongbo tong thata yi ba jak go nga phongbo jin zamana de nga ro zu nga phongbo mai ba aro nyong sem tang tang nga phongbo se gam nge phongbo ji to nga ti dag de zambe phongbo ti do ko ro yi ba de ji lo dang sha kan do wa de ji de nga phongbo jin jo to gam do wa phongbo 다tin 좀 맡는 홍보 나세든 종고 요런 종랑 간단 조과즈리도 다 홍보 나오텔라 딱점기 딱답이 딱점지 그 내가 냠즈 조트고 요래시 어때잖아 땅 같은 원이 정도 나지 남들 난 도시점 딱비 딱점지 저기 때마도 한쯤이 요 말을 나 홍보고 땅나 요 말을 홍보 링크 땅나 요 말을 내가 아주 어떠시고 진짜 대삼로지 땅 주증 아주 나세때 간다지지 봉보래 봉보 타다인데 봉보 타다 옛날 봉보 타다 열리 온던 간다들이 대삼로 땅 거지.
So our analytical meditation, and for today, it should be conducted or performed in the following way. First of all, and just take a moment and to see how you see that the way you responded to the questions of yourself or I. And when you pay attention to this very phenomena called I, and in terms of whether it's existed or not, you will say, oh, me, I, myself, I am here. I am existed. This is me, this is I am. So that's quite a kind of how you responded in your daily life. Well, now our task is not just content, satisfied with this sort of a random response, a random the action, right? or result of our attention in a very, very general way. But rather, we say, okay, I'm existed, right? I'm here, okay? So then you have to say how I can locate myself. The next step you need to take is that, like I said, not content, satisfied with what you just say, I'm here, I am. But rather say how I locate it, where this I, or me, or person, self is located. You need to find that it's a very locality of that very I you claim. It seems very obvious to you. When you try to locate, right, find a place in which this very I, that you, or self, person is existed, and you will end up have to find it or locate it from the 5 aggregates, or the aggregates in general. So the aggregates, it seems that is the place where you can find out or locate that where I claim or self, you believe it is existed. Okay, so 5 aggregates in general, it seems that it's the place where it is located, right? It's kind of a so where you are survived, let's say, right? Then we need to see whether I, your very I, self, and its aggregates where you survived, or you think that's is the location where you are located. Then the next step, an analytical meditation you need to practice is to find out whether that I, your I, self, and the aggregates are one or separated. Let's say there's a one, because when you look at that your I in the aggregates, it has to only can, and when you try to define the relations between yourself and I and the aggregates where you survive, then you only can reach out to the 2 possible results or and possible outcome. And that is either your I and the aggregates are one, or yourself, you, your person, self, your I, and the aggregates are separate entity. So now, if you consider that, if you're finding inquiry, drawn the conclusion that is say, I and my aggregates are one, then you naturally will see this very conclusion is very problematic. Okay? Why? Because if it's your I and your aggregates, which you think is where you are truly located, then cannot be one. Why? Because our basic natural senses that as we generally addressed or expressed, my aggregates or my sort of form of my mind or my perception, my feelings, and my volitions and my consciousness, you would make such a claim, right? And because that's how it appears to you, right? And that's how you experience your empirical knowledge confirms that is the case. So therefore, see, the conclusion you draw and say, I and my aggregates are one, that's very, or you believe it that's the case, is it proves it's not true, right? However, then on the other hand, if you say you're searching or inquiry, sort of lead you to the point where you see you and yourself, your aggregates are separate entity, right? Then you need to find out if you, the way you find it is separate entity is that you as some kind of like the owner, right, or the master, and the rest of the aggregates if serve like something under your control, right? So one is like the author, an author, and the person who is play the role of authority, and the five aggregates is play the role of subject. Then you know this is not the case, and then that proves that it's really again you got that very wrong, because now you see this the unrelated sort of this two entity I and the five aggregates are and existed sort of and existed and running under their own power. So, and now our fundamentally our meditation, our effort is that we must find ourselves, the relationship between ourselves and the aggregates is neither independently exists the one, also neither independently separately existed, dualistically existed two entities, but rather our self is the production of the designation. The five aggregates is the basis of the designation. So when you see the relationship between your I and the five aggregates, is that the I is the designated entity, then you will see that I is neither the continuity of the consciousness, right? It's not the one with the aggregates. It's also not a totally separated entity with the aggregates, but rather it is the designated entity. So when you see yourself as designated entity, then that means you understood the true status of the self or the person.
어때다 삼동고 드니 마츠나다 당아주 지금 nga 개와인 패밀리인 세로 nga 만바인 개인 세로 어다도 사마니 코로나랑 징기트나 접다 요르제 마레지 때까지는 코 개와던 패밀리 세도 리그 착당지 yaptın katolası batı ligi çıktınız kanı çabırçini mangattaga jagoresi nene manbayını geyin sedu koronga şeligi çani nikola mangattaga jagor koronang şitte yona ko kewa takwani maşpar deworte ne takuyo mo ko şeligi gitan jagor ne kom bombo yok borsede ko manga taksımız kanı tağı tin sata ani o tapi taksımsa tenin jungwa zamchita ani ko jungwari esane tenjung guttonda da tongban이 gittonda pa chigitng o yung atoko ta te tangwa ta te la teni taktsumi ba chi hagona 다양한 상황과 가령으로 때 다들 때 인델라 때는 망보즈 틀리 오네 디 인델라 초파델라다 때는 딱 용고를 딱 용도 딱 강타서야 되네 다티 오래 용도야 뜨질시고.
So this is what we need to think to carefully be considered. After what I have just explained, before. So anyway, let's take a specific case and then we try to make our understanding more, our point more clear and approachable. So as we all very well known in our daily life, so we refer ourselves or identify ourselves and sort of introduce ourselves, say, I'm a man, or he is man, or I'm a woman, and she's a woman or female. And another hand, at the same time, we also point out either we identify ourselves or point out someone, say, he's a doctor, or I am a doctor, or I'm a teacher and students and so on and so forth. So we do this all the time. It seems perfectly normal, right? And perfectly okay. But we here something that we left behind, left out without any clear and understanding. That is, when we address ourselves, refer ourselves, or introduce ourselves as a man, right? We are primarily making such a claim or identifying ourselves in such a particular way is based upon our very physiology, okay? Our physical sort of a setting or the physical the status or the conditions in which we are closely associated. Right? Similarly, when we claim or identify ourselves as women, express ourselves in such a way is again based upon our very unique physiology and the physical setting of physical conditions in which we live, or that's closely associated with our state of being. So that again, you see, this is a very contextualized, right? It's very much conditioned and depend upon. So it's dependently established phenomena, the woman and man. At the same time, either we identify ourselves or others point out, you point out others as a physicians and doctors and students, teacher, and so on and so forth. We can name such a person, or we can identify such a person with a particular title, label them in a particular way. In this case, it is a doctor, teacher, students, and worker, a businessman, a manager, whatever, which are based upon the form of a particular professions, okay, or the professionalism, the job, the work that he or she or they is practicing. Right? So therefore, so-called doctor, teacher, and students, and businessman, right? In fact, it's not really a person a person who is independently and being that way, or doctor, teacher, students are not independently established or exists. It's in fact is named after or being labeled based upon he or she, the form of job he or she is doing, or the role that he or she or they play. So again, you can clearly see it's not a something that's intrinsically, right, but rather is dependently. So in this case, again, if we take one more step, look at the relations between the someone is who holds the office and who is involved in the decision or play the rules of the decision maker. let's say, the authority. And those people who are hold the power, we call them as a boss, right? Or we call them as a leader. And at the same time, we point out or classify a certain particular group of people as a citizen, right? Even say the worker, or in the worst case scenario, say the servant, right? Whichever the way, and either you point out someone who is the leader and the head or the boss, or others as the servant and or worker. All these are actually proves this the same same thing that is true, just like we talked about before. So-called the leader, boss, ahead, in fact, is only in relation to a particular form of a position, a job, and activities. So therefore, the head or the boss, right, the leader themselves is not being a leader by themselves or by their own way. In their own way. In fact, it is dependently being labeled and established. Same thing. So if you identify people, a particular group of people as a worker, is again to depend upon, because of the form of job, the activities and they involved, doing on the regular basis, but they themselves is not really the worker or the servant, and that is kind of built in or established intrinsically. Right? So seeing this point, see how the relations between the each individual, right, and the form of their job they're doing, and the particular physiology or physical body, and a unique physical body that is endured with, then we will see that so-called I or self is not inherently existed, is not independently produced, is not independently existed or running under its own power, but rather is a dependently arising. So you see this, and then you know that to claim you as the absolute inherently one, and of course is wrong, and then claim that you as a self, as an individual, is inherently independently existed separate entity that's also is wrong, and then so if you point out that the continuity as a self, right, and then you know that again is you are conceptually designated.
어디다 봉보 꼴찌거든 아다 봉보 코롱당 말이다 이나다 봉보 촉받던 촉비 봉보 인등 알아서 때 자고로 왔어 때 자가나 때를 관사가 저는 그 말이에요 베나 아니 강타들 쏘는다 강타 코롱 샤워도 자동차 용으로 상타세도 가르즈나 강타세도 촉점질라 파 촉점질라 망 딱배 딱점질 요르마도 내 상타를 따진 촉반 내 상타를 든데 인데 촉반 상타 작트고요 말이지 단 돈에네 저때 양로 촉준다 때니 상타 조바진 대전 봉원남 때니 근조 셈지 시조도 아니 결혼 요나 띠거나 촉비 떠나 저기는 자니 송는 예고거다 또 레리레리는 자니 송나 예고 말이 봉보 상대 촉좀 담지 찌그레베는 찌그레가 말이 다다 착송나 다다 레전 타오드가 내가 찍당 다다 강아 많이 봤던지 다 조트메 빠세나 또 조트메 비 엔텐지 딱비 딱점지 니타고 또 마토네 랑진지 봐 코랑랑 스키트 되는지 강한에 떠나 방부 땅오 집에 찾잖아 이거 말은 오 다다게 찾잖아라고 말 되는지 차가 월된 자다네 아 세대 딱배 딱쯤이 맞대는 종화 점지 장고를 또마도 랑스키 집에 늘어지는 작트 그 말을 뜻이 봐.
Okay, so like we said about the continuity, as if you consider continuity as the person, in this case, of course, we're talking about the inherently existent, right? In the sense of the self, which is an inherently existed entity. In that sense, that if you point out the continuity of your aggregates, right? And then say itself. If you again not satisfied with that conclusion, and then you go examine the validity of the conclusion that you've drawn, whether it's compare, right? Compare the critical analysis, then you find that which actually is not true. It cannot bear the critical analysis. And to make this point clear, let's take an example of the car or the chariot in the past. Okay? Let's say the chariot or car, and we all know that we own this car or we drive this car. We know what a car looks like, right? But again, if you engage in and the undertaking, right? You bring this concept of the car you own, the car you know, right? The car you drive or others are using, and put it in the very critical meditative analytical meditation. Then you will see that that very concept of car or the car you think is independently, objectively, right? Autonomously sort of existed. That what you could use to believe, in fact, that concepts will be severely damaged or cannot bear the critical analysis, cannot take the challenges of your critical analysis. Why? Because, okay, you say, okay, this is my car, right? Then what do you mean, right? If you go take a further analytical inquiry, you will see that the car you're not talking about the car as the assembly, as whole thing up there. That is the car. Why? Because that's the assembly, right? So if you say assembly of the car is the car, then so you actually named that assembly, the car, and depend upon the assembly. But assembly of the car is not car. That's clear, right? And also, that car is not something sort of a separate, unrelated, right, entity with the assembly, which you at the first place point out to say that's my car or that is the car, right? So then, what is the car? To answer this question, and just like we read from the sutra, right, a few moments ago, in sutra it says, just as we speak of chariots dependent on the collection of parts, so we speak of sentient being conventionally independence on its aggregates. Right. So here the car, like the sutra says, right, the chariot or the car is dependent on the collection of the parts. It's the production. It's not within the assembly. It's not one with the assembly of the parts of the what we call the car. Also, it's not the absolute sort of independently separate the entity. All right, but rather it is the production which is dependent on the collection of the parts. But it's designated by depend upon the collection of what we call the core, the parts. So we take this. If we understand this point, then understand the relationship, the real relationship between the our understanding of a car and that physical assembly of the collective body of the thing, which we point out are named after a car, right? Then we see that the relation between the car and the assembly of the car, the collective body of the car, is neither independently being the one also, nor is it independently separated entity, but rather it's dependently arised. So if you truly see this point, understand the subtleties of this relationship between the car and the collective body of the parts of the car, then you take this example to the yourself, right? And then you can see that the same logic can be applied to the relationship between you and the aggregates, depending upon which and your so-called self has been designated. So we have about 15 minutes, and if you have questions, I would like to take your question. If you don't, we can practice the analytical meditation. We just study what we learn, discuss.
Just one thank you so much for the wonderful teaching. I think this is more a comment than a question, and that is, I think that there is a lot of kind of modern research on the human body, biology, stress, and psychology that would really cast doubt for those of us who would say that the self is somehow very different from the body. Just for those who are kind of new, they may not understand the 5 aggregates. One of the aggregates that we might be tempted to talk about is the body, or maybe the mind as well. Those are aggregates. But the recent research would really suggest that our mind is very embodied. And so things like stress in our environment, the languages that we use, the gut and the health of our gut, our immune systems can all affect our mind and our level of consciousness. And so if we were tempted to say that the self or I is completely different from the body or the mind, that would be very inconsistent with kind of modern science, I would say, and put that into doubt. So at least on that flank, there is a lot of recent research to suggest that the way that our mind and our level of consciousness operates is very embodied, and our environments, our language, very affected in this way. Yes.
May I? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Does Geshe-la want to speak?
No.
Yeah, no.
Dilzin, maybe Yana,
Bölüm, cuma
So,
kopi, ne kosa?
this is a code.
I would like to
Last year.
challenge that.
Don't matter, yeah, more the draw on such a like.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mel.
Hi, Tenzin.
Yes.
It's Holly.
Oh, how are you?
Good, thank you. I'm nervous about this because of course, my understanding on this isn't complete. But, so remind me of the 5 aggregates again: form, perception, feeling, consciousness, and I know I'm missing one.
Volition.
Volition, thank you. And volition is the 5th?
4th.
4th?
Yeah, mental formation or volition. Yeah.
Oh, is that the same as consciousness or no?
Different.
Different. So, so you have volition and then you become conscious of the volition. You encounter a form. So there's a
Is that your
form.
question? Is that your question for Geshe Kongala?
No, I wanted to respond to Victor.
Okay.
So my understanding is kind of opposite of what Victor just said. So
We have a party.
Let's start simple with seeds. So you can have 2 seeds from the same tree that are genetically identical form, right? That are genetically identical. But depending on the causes and conditions that these 2 seeds encounter, they will grow into very different physical forms. You could have this seed and plant it here in the lush green. It gets plenty of water, plenty of rain. All of the causes and conditions go into it. It creates this very lush tree. It doesn't encounter much stress. You have another seed, same tree, genetically identical. You put it in the desert where it doesn't have water and it doesn't have lush soil and it's very harsh conditions and it's very stressful. Even though the genetics are the same, they'll grow into very different trees. So Victor was, from what if I hear you correctly, you were saying that modern psychology and physiology don't. So, would disagree with saying there's a mind-body disconnect, that the mind and the body are the same. That people with modern, am I understanding you correctly, Victor?
I think that, yes. So the point that I'm raising is that the mind is very influenced by the body.
And the mind is also influenced by external causes and conditions.
Correct.
So therefore, there is no inherently existent self.
Correct.
There is an imputed self. So for example, I meet 2 different people. Someone has a great encounter with me. Oh, she's sweet. That's awesome. Somebody else has not so great, other causes and conditions. I react differently, and so they think I'm a horrible person. Each person imputes a different self. They designate me as a different self. This person designates me as a kind self. This person designates me as a grumpy self. So that's designation. It's so hard because you have emptiness of self and emptiness of other. So it's so complex. I'm trying to. So to me, emptiness of inherent existence, and I'm silly. I am nowhere near realized. I'm blind, but to me, emptiness of inherent self means that it arises out of various causes and conditions. So it's relational. So therefore there's not an inherent self, it's a relational self. And that goes back to the seeds and the relationship between the environment and the self seed and what that creates. And then, of course, emptiness. Yeah. So there's emptiness of self and emptiness of others. And and as I said, I'm still grappling with all of this myself. My imputed self. So anyway, I don't know if that made any sense at all. Forgive my rambling. Thank you for your patience.
Mo cái gì đó tôi sẽ bên là cái gì thì mo cái gì thì có nào thì chỉ thì có là cái yêu cầu của người Somali mà chúng mình thì đó phải tạo thành gì mà đó nó tốt biết là cái đó sẽ có nó tốt biết ni mà cái điều mo chỉ para mas sang cái gì đấy cái page ra xong rồi 아니 우리 같이 만큼 바탕에 맞지 미치고 여고 지금 상고 지금 우리 같이 많이 지 마가 당 맞죠 되게 미치가 돼 우리 지금 되게다 그 니가로 시작해 되지 가서 네 맞으니 딱딱 장비 마 마비는 거기에 딱딱 생각들이 인데러스를 들으시 뭐 거라는 사람이 있는 상황이었어. 아니 제안다 내가 니와데 뭐가 뭐 시드스 뭐 사무실 거 사본디 아니 찌바지장 알아는 것은 다 처리해 줘야 되는지 그냥 찌바지장에 있나요? 그 내사기 다 제사기 코리기 이jen게 추당 님묘와서 거기 뭐냐가 장엔 다 야든기 처벌셔제네 가제버서 직접 야고 지는 비우면버리 찌바지나 제상으로 지금 자샤베나 아니 거기 지야지가 말와 대송장 아니 그 사원 찌바레스 그 찌바이바다 그 덴투 그렇게 요사래 아니 그 찌바레도 그냥 담보니 찌바지냐래도 옛날에 치 거의 비jen게 다 그 좋아 진바티 웨크처럼 그냥 도션 되어서 뜻이거든. 그래서 강보 담보니 이러왔으니 그 지금 마세지 랑진지 매바치 랑진지 매바 인자네 그 이다데 대중이 되듯이 그 뭐가 저번에 지부디 사본디가 아니 찌바 찌자 아니 요데가 쟁게 다 좋아 정성을 레스 송산의 쟁라로 되어있는 사본디 마주바 랑진지 요데가 들리시 한번 고알은 그 사르서 그렇지.
네, 프로페서가 너도로
그리고 너도들이 아니 요즘 저거 지 요요가 돼서 이건 사원을 자잖아 소리. 그니 genetically 쓰나봐 GDP는 그 진거지장. 얘는 치기 쟁기 다 고카카자 소리. 이마도 지금 사원 관람이 그랑 다른 이 지거지장 저 요래랑 치치비는 요래스. 다들 이제 치 거의 그 different 세게 되지. 니와이나 뭐가 다른데
뭐도 고송 잡았대. 아클로가 나도 프로페서가 알아서 또 뭐도 딱 고송해.
땡땡은 저거 판서 이제 당문이니까 이제 지불자한테 그냥 치지요가 찍어요. 말해서 그래. 방글로 그 이제 젠다한테 이게 주기 아니 도스지에 딱 파스가 진저와 그 아서 파텐 시스템이 나오지는 이제가 도시하게 말해서 그래. 레코드 랑징게 들어봤으나다 당문이니까 대단데 그냥 통화는 내시 도와서 되는지 요 말해서 Then the psychologists now that some country pattern and Nizil pattern all the took a channel Mamush to pass the channel balance of what engineers to that was the Mamazo midi and the media for the Samba down, the Tanam shit now, and the good like Maja Pundu. I said, Nachina Bundu, and not as a people 它上面这个是字部了不要的是，但是对应的什么它到底进行什么呢？你每次的字部讲上来，样字部讲了那上面的吧，才进来那那意思那个这个字上面的吧，你查的呢？因为大讲什每次那个上次那个马些的，我这话在这话真是这是个观念，你这个上就是那个这话。这是个团体的，你两个团体你讨论吧，就那么多，是不可能马上要买的，什么可能要买的是的，Professor Victor都的这个。
다 기타만에 네 뭐런 거
로또 그러니까 또왜 또 생각하냐 홀리데이 버젯 노비를 살려서
네 기타 지난 아주 사원 사원들의 기타 결리 기술을 좀 아주 늦지 당다 맞지 이ችን 늦지라면 저다 열린기 기타 한치식인 이용 거 사원 때에 그런 건 일라 열린 기사가 니와 열린세도 곧 당하는 야 기용사 때 사원 때 자꾸 그랬어 한치식인세 때라 로징인 거다 쳐당랬던 소바때 때 저자다 한치식인 때 니가 좀 봐야나 다 저병 거서 진짜 이나 당보 사원 답요 사원 코랑 랑진지 바치바치장 요르드나 자니요 말 사원 코랑 용사로 잘절리소나요 사원 때는 배 망아 때는 종아점데 니와로 티가 싹을 타죠 때 당보 네 사원 직지 절라 샹도 때라 노 사원 직지 되게 종고요자 때 인도영 파파지 망보삼 당고요 되자 임리게 남정시로다 고 사원 때 직방하고 밀어 촌바이나 미치 따랑시 그 아주 샘기랑 냥지 당샤비 당니 제바 직바이나라 소중 때던 거니 가시베 미 득습 타고 잠시와 되는 정도 가시베 야고 상부 창도 어때 용전은 더 한치 세긴 그 예당 견라서니 예당 견즈니 예당 견이 잡으려 무시송나 예때 코런 열린기 예당 한시긴 여즈네 좀더 열린기 이제 그런 게 있을 때 저거라 어떻지 그래 다 단다 가서 경시주 때네 코런 다 잔이 손은 가지 시기 더는 좀 시기도 시에든 가서 타 쪽에든 가서 샘을 다 그러시라 샘들이다 샘제도 샘거든네 가서 샘세야 될라 때네 샘들 파자니 손은 샘들라 이기 넘버 시와 될라네 공부 그 넘버 시와 특지 될라 때니 델리 중 샘숑들이 다시 뭐가 좀다 샘드 간다들이 썰쪽이 때다 샘지 일기도 하고나 샘진일 때 언제 오사와이고 그때 식다고 그러지 그라 다 종근데 강아도 요르즈 메르즈 산리피션한테 서셔지나 다 종근데 샘비체고 샘면은 지 요 말은 거 정말 샘때 간다지 그때 다 종고다 아니 강서 때 가서 지 라니 발마 되다 샘 잠비시나 참아 샘 그쯤이 방어 좀 파송은 요 말에서 그런 쓰바지 다들 삼던 거고 또 요나 강서 시길라 베나가라 마가지 미치 요나 또 정말 마가 착을 착가 말미 가실 때 년착다로 가실 또차도 가실 다차도 이나 때 그런 라진 때 다차 년착다 파서 강서 티콩 요 말에 파서 강서 샘근 전당 기군이 작게 그랬으시고 따뜻히 삼당 뭐부터 같이 차다 아니 요것도 내리 시기면 되라 아 저도 좁아지니까 삼도 삼시지랑세도 같이 볼시라 근데 소소 니나네 오마트가 났더니 말도 용걸 말도 오마 마트가 가오장나 루도 제가 라면 찾아가 야 that's
Okay. So if I understood two of you through the translation correctly, here in brief what I like to share with you. First of all, in response to the idea of genetical, or the two seeds, which is identical genetically. From a Buddhist point of view, and the very idea of genetically or identical, in fact, is still questionable, because it looks to you, right, and it is identical and genetically. But in fact, what that very we know there's two seeds are the production of something else prior to the two seeds, the existence of the two seeds, right? And the two seeds is the evolved respectively or separately involved the different causes and conditions, right? And there are primary causes and there are secondary causes or supportive causes. And so therefore these two seeds, let's say if you consider, right, that two seeds is genetically identical in the sense that it is been fixed or sort of underrunning. It's underrunning its own power. Then we know that is not the case. Why? Because it is a production of something else. In other words, there are two seeds at this point that we call genetically identical. In fact, it is the compositional phenomena. It's composed, right? Since it's composed, that means it's involved with different entities. And again, it's involved its unique primary cause and the secondary causes. So since the primary causes and secondary conditions are different from one to another, so therefore, in the subtle sense, that very fixed, identical two seeds are not as fixed or as sort of absolutely under its own power, which is not the case. Right? So that's the yes now, and then let's say about the idea of I, right? The I and it's again something that's involved with this the primary cause and the secondary conditions, right? And so since it's involved with the primary cause and the secondary conditions, or in other words, is the production of something else, is a compositional phenomena. So therefore, it's not really something within it or embedded it, right? Intrinsically, but rather is determined by some other factors, something else. Let's say you call I or me. So someone who is determining that, who is making a decision, who is producing or say and or designated make this designation, right? Who is that decision maker, or who is the one? What is the one? Who is the one who determined the I or me or self? Generally speaking, if you're looking, the agent, right, the very actor who doing such a thing, and named after I, that is the mind. In other words, our mind, generally speaking, is the one who determining, who name, who label, and that very I. And then the mind, when looking into what is the mind and the categorization, we try to see the classification of the mind, you will see that the 6 forms of them. And then, of course, from Buddhist psychological and system, and you will see that there are primary mind and the factors and the factors of the mind and so on and so forth, and things have become more complicated. So anyway, mind, our experience tells us that our mind is the one who make the kind of formal call, or who is the one who name and designated or label, characterizing or conceptualizing something, then we refer to as I or me or self, right? So then our spiritual practice should, always focus on the our essential goal, that is to realize the actuality of our identity, or the true nature of ourself. So at this point, our analysis said, our mind is the one who name and or classify or recognize and determine what I or who I and label all those things. Then we needed to know the nature of that very name producer, the one who make the name, the label, right, something else, or designated something that's then claimed as I or me. We have to see the nature of that. They understand the true fundamental nature of that label producer, our mind. If we see our mind, right, which is essentially is clarity and awareness, right, or is translucent and a clear light, and then we can understand how all this the wave or the network of labeling process has been produced, or the labeling process has been leading through. And in fact, according to the Chittamatra School of Philosophy, or the Yogacara School of Philosophy, and it clearly states that everything, right, is a mere mind, or is a reflection of the mind itself. And so therefore, they arguing that for this reason, for that very reason, so you cannot find anything objectively out there, like the person. So we know that for some people, you as an individual, other people would appreciate it, and very happy to be with, and very fond of you. But others are kind of ignore, and it doesn't care that much. And others just disapprove and dislike it, and don't want to be with, have any relation with you. So that clearly proves what the Chittamatra or Yogacara School of Philosophy says, that everything is the reflection of the mind, or the imputational. So anyway, and our job is to do the critical analysis and to investigate and study and discuss and debate. In fact, the conversations like we just had is very healthy, very useful, important, because I give you the analogy, for example, that we Tibetans culturally, the famous for the dairy products, and like, for example, like make a butter, right? And so the very butter, tasty and food we can enjoy is the result of the stirring, right? The shaking. So you have to stir in the milk hard, and to shake in the milk hard. Then from that process of shaking or stirring, then you will have the butter. You can appreciate it. But if you do not shaking, stirring, and then leave the milk alone, the milk will get spoiled. So therefore, my suggestion is, and exchange your ideas, your interpretations, and even debates and of the point is clear. So that's all.
Good teacher.
Okay. Yeah, okay. This one.
She wants you to read.
Mylin gave me something to read. She's saying guest is the soul, guest home is the body. When we die, the guest leaves behind your guest house. Okay, thank you, Geisha Lakunga, Tempa, and Tenzin. If you would like, I left my bowl over there. If you would like to make a donation to this teaching, it would be greatly appreciated by the monastery and the monks. And you would also be donating to our translator, Tenzin. And you can do this by calling 812-336-6807 or by emailing the temple, tmbcc.kcl@gmail.com. For those of you here in the temple, I'll pass around the begging bowl. And if you would like to make a donation, it would be very appreciated. If you cannot, you can say a prayer or a mantra in the bowl, or you can do both. There's fruit outside in the hall or out in the hallway, and it's from yesterday's puja if you would like to help yourself. And also Professor Victor brought some donuts. So thank you. And so please help yourself as you leave.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks, Victor.
Okay, we'll say the closing prayer on page number 80.